The ocean stretched wide and endless under a gray sky as a lone yacht sliced through the waters near Okinawa. Its white hull gleaming faintly against the restless waves on deck stood a woman calm, poised and silent, her hair pulled tight beneath, a navy cap that looked far too official for a civilian. Her eyes fixed on the horizon as though she was measuring more than distance, more than direction. Somewhere behind those eyes, calculation never stopped. Her hands moved over the wheel. Steady, deliberate, like she was used to steering something much larger and deadlier than a yacht. And though the sea around her was quiet, she could feel the hum of distant engines and the tension of being watched on the radar deck of the USS Corbin, a massive Navy destroyer. The operator leaned closer to his screen, eyes narrowing as a small, unidentified signal flickered across the map. It was moving through a restricted corridor, one marked for classified operations. He called for his superior, and within moments, the bridge filled with activity. Voices layered commands, sharp and urgent. The captain approached, his post expression carved in stone. He had seen hundreds of vessels cross these waters, but none this bold to move straight into a black zone. Without transponder or identification was either madness or intention, and he was about to find out which one as he gave the order for all engines ahead, intercept and identify the mysterious yacht. The destroyer shifted its path, massive engines, roaring as sailors scrambled to positions, binoculars lifted and radars locked. The small yacht came into view, floating serene and unaffected, as if unaware of the growing storm surrounding it. The comms officer raised his mic and spoke into the open channel unidentified vessel. "This is the USS Corbin. You are entering a restricted naval sector. Halt immediately and prepare for inspection." Silence followed, only the rhythmic crash of waves against metal. A second warning went out, firmer, louder. Still the yacht moved slowly, but it did not stop. And somewhere on the destroyer's deck, a tension like static filled the air, as though every sailor could sense something unusual, something wrong aboard the yacht. The woman finally turned her head, toward the sound of the siren echoing across the water. Her gaze didn't waver, not even for a heartbeat. She reached into the pocket of her jacket, pulled out a small leather case and placed it beside the console. Her movements carried the stillness of habit, of confidence that had been earned, not given. Then she pressed a switch. The yacht's lights dimmed slightly, the vessel slowed almost to a drift. She looked up toward the massive silhouette of the destroyer approaching, and for the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. It wasn't a smile of fear or surrender, but one that belonged to someone who knew exactly what was coming and was ready for it. The destroyer loomed closer now. Sailors lined the rails watching as the yacht floated. Beneath the shadow of steel, someone muttered under their breath, asking if they should ready the boarding craft. But the captain lifted a hand and waited. He wanted a visual first. His instincts told him this wasn't an ordinary trespasser through. His binoculars, he studied the woman standing on deck, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. Something about her seemed out of place too, composed, too trained. He gave the nod to the deck team to move in, and soon a small launch boat descended. From the destroyer's side, racing toward the yacht, cutting through the waves like a bullet. The woman didn't move. She stood near the railing as the launch came closer, spray of salt water glistening around her. The sailors aboard the small craft shouted over the noise of the engine, demanding identification, but she only gestured for them to come aboard. They hesitated briefly, then hooked the craft against the yacht's side and climbed up, rifles slung and faces stern. The first sailor stepped forward, ready to detain her, but she held out the leather case. Her fingers steady, the sailor opened it and froze. Inside was a Navy identification card, but not just any card. It was marked with a golden insignia, the kind reserved for an admiral. The kind only a handful of people in the entire fleet carried, and the name printed across the bottom made the color drain from his face. He stared at her, then back at the card, then to his superior, who had just climbed aboard. And in that moment, no one spoke. The air itself seemed to. Still, the officer grabbed the radio, his voice barely steady as he called the destroyer captain. "Sir, you need to see this right now." And before the captain could even respond, the image feed from the body cam flickered onto the main bridge screen, showing the woman her calm face, her unmoving stance, and the unmistakable glint of authority in her eyes. The captain leaned forward, his breath catching in his throat, because he recognized her name, though he had never met her in person. She was Admiral Elena Drake, once the commanding officer of the Pacific Strike Group vanished from records after a classified incident in the Mariana sector 3 years prior. Many believed she was dead. Others whispered she had resigned under sealed orders, but to see her here alone on a civilian yacht inside a restricted naval corridor, defying his destroyer's commands, was something that made every trained instinct scream that this was no coincidence. He ordered immediate verification from headquarters. But as the communication officer dialed through the encrypted line, all he received was static, and as the captain's eyes lifted from the silent screen toward the woman who now stood waiting below deck, something deep in his gut told him that whatever brought her here wasn't over, and that the calm surface of the ocean was only hiding the storm to come. The captain stood motionless, staring at the grainy image of Admiral Elena Drake, her name alone carried weight in every corridor of the Navy, her record filled with impossible missions and silent victories, the kind that never reached the news, the kind that reshaped oceans. Yet here she was, standing on a yacht like a ghost from classified history. As the destroyer slowed to a cautious crawl, the crew whispered her name like it was a legend. Come to life. The first officer stepped forward, asking if they should continue the boarding protocol. The captain hesitated every regulation, screamed yes, but instinct whispered no. This woman outranked everyone on board, even if she was off duty, even if she was supposed to be gone. The comms officer tried the channel again. Static hissed through the speakers. Command was unreachable, no. Encryption response, no signal bounce, not even a ping from satellite relay. Something was jamming the airwaves. The captain frowned. This sector was supposed to be clean, free of interference. The destroyer was the most advanced vessel in its fleet. Yet their entire communication system was collapsing into silence, as if the ocean itself had swallowed every voice. He ordered the crew to run diagnostics, but deep down, he knew this wasn't a malfunction. This was a test, and Admiral Drake was the one holding the answer. On the yacht below, the Admiral moved with precision, checking her instruments, eyes flicking across readings that only she could interpret. She wasn't here by accident. She was following something invisible. To the destroyer's sensors, she could feel its pattern in the static waves beneath the surface, a frequency pulse that didn't belong to nature or any known transmission. She adjusted the yacht's sonar, and the screen lit up with a faint shimmer, a signal deep underwater, faint but deliberate. She whispered to herself, confirming a suspicion that had haunted her for months. She had come to find it alone because no one else was allowed to know what was hiding beneath these waters. The boarding party still stood on the yacht, unsure what to do. The officer in charge finally asked permission to return to the destroyer. The Admiral turned her gaze on him, steady and sharp. She told them to tell their captain to keep his ship still. No engines, no sonar, no broadcasts, just silence. Her tone was calm, but the kind of calm that comes from command. The officer hesitated, wanting to question her authority, but something in her stare froze the words before they left his mouth. They obeyed, returning to the destroyer. In uneasy silence, the sea rolled between the vessels like a breathing wall of tension. When the boarding craft returned, the first officer relayed her message. The captain's jaw tightened. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to remind her that this was his command, his ship. But deep inside, he couldn't ignore the weight of her title or the glint in her eyes from the footage he had seen. She wasn't acting out of protocol. She was acting out of necessity, and that made her dangerous. He ordered the destroyer to hold position engines, idle weapons cold, but his mind churned with questions. Why would an admiral disappear for years, then reappear here alone on a civilian yacht inside a restricted zone that his own ship had been, quietly assigned to patrol under orders marked Eyes Only below deck. The sonar operator suddenly stiffened, sir. He said, "We've got movement." The captain turned to the screen expecting another small vessel, but what appeared instead was a shape larger and deeper than any submarine signature. It wasn't moving like a vessel either. It was hovering, pulsing, like it was sending something through the water before the captain could respond. The signal vanished, leaving only ripples of distortion across. Their instruments the operator checked again and again, but the system readings made no sense, whatever it was. It was beneath them, and it was watching. The Admiral on her yacht looked up. Her instruments confirmed the same. She could feel the presence. Like a low vibration under the hull, her fingers hovered over the comm switch, then stopped. She didn't call the destroyer instead. She opened a secure device that she had kept sealed until now, a miniature transmitter shielded against detections. She keyed in a code sequence, and a quiet green light appeared. It connected her to something beyond the fleet. Beyond the chain of command, a channel known only to a handful of intelligence officers. The voice on the other end was synthetic, distorted, and cold. She gave her report in few words. Object located, signal active interference. Confirmed. The voice responded with a single phrase, proceed to verify, and then the light went dead again, leaving her in silence. On the destroyer, the captain's patience was thinning. The lack of response from command was gnawing at him. He watched the yacht motionless in the waves, the Admiral's figure standing near the rail like a sentinel. He wanted answers, and he wanted control. He ordered the engines to low power and turn the ship slightly to get a clearer sonar angle. The operator protested, saying the Admiral had told them not to move, but the captain ignored it. The destroyer groaned as its turbines stirred the sea, and in that exact instant, the sonar flared violently. A piercing sound rattled through the speakers. The lights flickered and alarms blared across the deck. The operator shouted that the signal had spiked beneath them. Whatever was down there had noticed their movement. The Admiral's eyes snapped toward the destroyer. She saw its shift, felt the vibration ripple through the water. Her instruments screamed with interference. The object below had awakened, and now the readings were climbing faster than she expected. She grabbed her binoculars, focusing on the destroyer's hull. She could almost see the distortion pattern rising toward it like something pushing upward from the depth she reached for her transmitter. But before she could speak, the water around her yacht began to tremble. On the destroyer, chaos filled the bridge as systems flickered and screens glitched. The captain shouted for damage control, thinking maybe a malfunction. But the operator yelled, "It's not us, sir. It's external, it's coming." From below then, without warning, the sonar image expanded, revealing a massive rotating formation below the destroyer. Something circular, something metallic and old. The shape pulsed once, then again, each wave shaking the steel frames of the ship. The captain felt his heart pound as realization settled in. This wasn't an enemy submarine or a drone. This was something no one had told them about, something buried deep beneath classified charts. The Admiral's voice finally broke through the static of their comms. Low, steady, and commanding, she ordered him to shut down every system, immediately power communication sonar. Everything, she said, do not move, do not broadcast. And though his pride resisted, something in her tone sliced through. The fear and confusion he obeyed. The engines went dark. The lights dimmed, and for a brief, terrifying moment, the destroyer floated dead in the water. The sea fell silent, except for the sound of distant echoes rising from below, and as the Admiral watched the black water churn under her yacht. She knew this was only the beginning, and that whatever lay hidden beneath those waves was not done revealing itself yet. The sea had gone still around them, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. The destroyer floated dead in the water, every light dimmed to a faint ghostly glow. The crew spoke in whispers, afraid to even move too loudly below deck. The hum of machines had been replaced by a heavy silence, only broken by the slow drip of condensation. From the ceiling, the captain stood near the observation window, watching the small yacht that now seemed like the eye of a storm, a single woman aboard controlling the tension of 2 million tons of steel and nerves. His mind raced to find logic. But every explanation he reached for dissolved in the face of what he had seen on the sonar. There was something under them, and it was alive, or it was aware, and the difference no longer mattered on. Her yacht Admiral Elena Drake adjusted the dials. Of her transmitter, her eyes fixed on the deepening darkness below her. Instruments flickered with faint signals, the kind that whispered of machines buried under layers of salt and pressure. She had read about such frequencies during her classified years leading the Pacific Strike Group. Anomalies recorded by deep sea buoys, then buried in reports stamped confidential for eyes above her rank. She had followed the threads until they led her here, a forgotten trench near Okinawa once used for naval tests, but now radiating a pattern that matched something ancient, something human-made. But beyond modern design, her gut told her she was not intercepting a weapon, she was intercepting a secret. Someone had tried to sink the destroyer's bridge. Buzzed with low murmurs as the captain's officers waited for orders, the silence from command felt heavier than the ocean itself. The comms officer tried one last ping, but the static only screamed louder. The radar flickered in shades of green and gray before stabilizing for a moment, then vanishing entirely. The operator turned pale, reporting that their own systems were rejecting their codes as if the ship itself had been locked out from the network. The captain clenched his fists. He wanted to confront the Admiral, demand an explanation, but his instincts stopped him. Every part of him screamed that she was still in control, that this entire encounter was something she had anticipated on the yacht. The Admiral's transmitter crackled. Alive! A faint voice coming through, distorted and mechanical, it said, "The sequence has been awakened, verification required." She hesitated. The voice was not command. It was the system itself, something old running in automatic loop. She replied with the code she had memorized years ago from a file marked Relic Protocol Omega. The voice responded, verified standby, and the sea beneath her vibrated softly like a machine waking from a dream. Her pulse quickened. She knew then that the object under them wasn't merely an anomaly. It was an installation, a deep-water station buried decades ago during the Cold War and sealed away after an experiment went wrong. She had found the pulse she had been hunting, but she had not expected it to still be functional. The destroyer's sensors picked up a heat bloom rising from the depths. The operator reported the temperature was climbing too fast for any natural reaction. The captain moved to the window, seeing faint bubbles emerging from below, the hull glowing faintly like embers rising from a sunken forge. Then the sonar beeped, once a single sound that made every sailor stop breathing. The Admiral's voice came through the emergency line, telling them not to respond. Not to send any signal, not even a whisper of transmission. She said it is listening, and those words alone made the captain feel the cold reach of something unseen pressing against the steel deep beneath the waves. Something massive began to move, its shadow rippling. Across the water columns, sensors struggled to map its shape. The readings showed a ring-like structure rotating slowly, emitting frequencies that matched old naval test beacons from the 60s. It wasn't natural, and it wasn't new. It had been built by human hands, but long forgotten. The captain watched the screens flicker as the readings grew unstable. He turned to his chief engineer, who whispered that the magnetic field below was shifting like a storm, pulling at every compass aboard. The destroyer, and then the lights went out, completely plunging the vessel into black silence. On the yacht, the Admiral felt the pulse intensify. She pressed a control switch, powering a small generator that lit her cabin in pale blue glow. The readings spiked to maximum. She realized that the station beneath had awakened because of the destroyer's movement earlier. Their engines had triggered the sensors. She opened her classified log and began recording. This was proof of the silent program. a project once rumored to create an autonomous defense array beneath the Pacific, an experiment in underwater warfare controlled by artificial intelligence. Before the technology was banned, the logs had claimed it was deactivated after it lost contact, but she knew better. She whispered the words, "Project Siren," as the water around her trembled, aboard the destroyer. Panic began to rise. The crew stumbled through the darkness. Emergency lights flickered red. The sonar operator shouted that something was rising fast from the deep directly below the stern. The captain shouted for full reverse, but the engines were still dead. He tried to hail the Admiral again, but the line was drowned in static and faint whispers that sounded almost human. Froze for a moment, hearing the static form words repeating over and over. "We remember, we remember." Until the signal cut off abruptly, and the deck lurched as if struck by something beneath. The Admiral clung to the railing as the shockwave reached, her yacht sending ripples across the sea. She could see bubbles rising now faster, larger, brighter. The water shimmered with unnatural light, and in that glow, she caught a glimpse of the shape breaking the surface, a structure metallic and enormous, lifting itself just enough to reveal the edge of a ring spinning slowly, covered in rust and symbols no one had seen in decades. She knew what it was. A command relay from the Siren Project, a system designed to control unmanned fleets through signal synchronization. But it was not supposed to activate without human code, and she had not given the code, which meant someone or something else had. The destroyer's crew scrambled to regain power. Lights flickered as generators roared back to life, systems rebooting one by one. But the radar now displayed multiple echoes surrounding them, moving in slow, deliberate arcs like shadows circling prey. The captain gripped the railing, shouting for visual confirmation, but the lookout reported nothing. Visible only waves and light distortions, as if the ocean itself was bending around them. The captain's throat went dry when the Admiral's voice came back faint and distant, saying, "Captain, you need to shut down everything again. This isn't an attack. It's a signal response, and if it locks onto your systems, it will take control." The captain stared at his console, blinking lights flickering across the panels. He hesitated, then reached for the main power switch, but before he could pull it, the ship's comm system activated on its own, broadcasting a voice across the decks, not from the Admiral, not from command, but from the deep channel itself, repeating one phrase over and over in distorted mechanical tone, "Return control, return control." And every sailor on board felt their blood freeze because the voice sounded like it knew their names. And as the Admiral stood on her yacht, staring into the churning sea, her reflection twisted in the glow below, she realized that what had been buried was never dead, and what had been silenced was only waiting to hear a human voice again. The destroyer groaned as if alive, the metal hull echoing with a low moan that vibrated through every corridor. Sailors clutched the rails, staring at consoles. Flashing with red warnings, none of the alarms made sense. They showed impossible data readings, pressure changes, radiation spikes, electromagnetic surges, all coming from beneath the hull. The captain shouted for the engineering crew to cut power. Again, but the switches refused to respond. The ship had become its own cage, its systems caught in a loop that no human could override. And in the midst of the chaos, the mechanical voice continued to echo. "Return control, return control," as if the sea itself demanded obedience. The Admiral stood frozen on the deck of her yacht, watching the destroyer thrash against invisible forces. She knew the system was reawakening, not fully, but enough to recognize the presence of human command. The signal she had detected months ago had not been random. It had been the Siren system calling for input, waiting for an operator, and now it had found one through the destroyer's active network. She whispered to herself that she was too late. The activation had already begun. She opened her transmitter again, inputting an override sequence that she had memorized from an old classified log. The screen flickered, once then went blank. The override failed. Deep below the waves, the buried ring continued to turn its inner lights, pulsing like the heartbeat of a sleeping creature. The frequency it emitted began to synchronize with the destroyer's systems, drawing power from its generators through resonance. The ship's lights dimmed, then flared as, if drained by something unseen, the crew felt static crawl across their skin and the smell of ozone filled the bridge. One of the sailors shouted that the sonar showed shapes moving outward from the ring, smaller echoes multiplying like a swarm. The captain realized with dread that these were drones, remnants of the Siren Fleet dormant machines that had been asleep for decades, now rising back to life. The Admiral knew what came next. If the system reached full activation, it would assume any armed vessel nearby was under its jurisdiction. It would seize control of their weapons and databanks. It would defend its sector from all perceived threats, including the very fleet. It once served, she turned the yacht toward the destroyer. Engines whining against the growing current. The water pulsed around her as the ring below increased its frequency. She could hear the hum deep through the hull like a voice whispering through the sea. She gritted her teeth and forced the yacht forward, knowing that if she didn't make contact in time, there would be no stopping it. Aboard the destroyer, the captain fought to keep his composure as the crew shouted overlapping reports. The drones were circling the vessel unseen but audible. Like faint metallic shrieks through the sonar, the communications officer yelled that the ship's code bank was being accessed remotely. He tried to shut it down, but the controls were already locked. The words access granted blinked across the screens. The captain slammed his fist on the console, shouting for someone to find a manual cutoff, but no one knew where to start. This was technology older than any of them, something from a project they had never been told existed. The Admiral's yacht drew closer, waves slamming against its bow. The air thick with static as lightning began to dance low over the water. She could see the destroyer's silhouette flickering in the distance like a mirage. She grabbed her flare gun, loaded it. With a signaling charge and fired into the sky, the crimson light arced high, bursting into a burning streak above the destroyer. She hoped the captain would understand that it wasn't distress. It was instruction she needed line of sight to transmit. The final override through direct relay, not through interference. She screamed into the wind, hoping he would seethe. Captain saw the flare and something in him decided to trust her. He ordered the ship to silence every system, but leave the visual. Sensors on. He gave command to reroute emergency power to the radar deck for visual link. Only as soon as the connection flickered to life, the Admiral's image appeared on screen. Her face wet from the spray, her expression fierce. She shouted instructions. The sound cutting in and out through static. She told him to connect the destroyer's signal booster to her yacht frequency to amplify her manual override. He hesitated for a second, then nodded to his operator. They opened the channel and the frequency link locked. For a moment, the sea went quiet. The hum from below steadied, then began to slow. The lights beneath the waves dimmed. The readings dropped for the first time in minutes. The destroyer's systems started releasing control one by one. Screens flickered back to normal, and the alarms fell silent. The captain exhaled a shaky breath, thinking it was over. But before relief could spread through the bridge, the sonar emitted one last sound, a long, low tone that vibrated through the floorboards. The operator whispered, "Sir, it's responding again. But this time it's not to us. It's transmitting outward to somewhere else." And as the Admiral heard the same pulse through her headset, she realized with cold certainty that the signal was no longer bound to this location. It had awakened the network, and somewhere across the ocean, other dormant systems would soon begin to stir. The wind howled across the open sea as the Admiral stood motionless on her yacht, staring into the black horizon. Her instruments glowed faintly, showing the pulse spreading outward, each wave of signal echoing farther into the deep. She knew what that meant. The Siren system had linked itself to the dormant network scattered across the Pacific. The technology they once believed dismantled had only been waiting for a command, and now it had one. The destroyer floated behind her, its decks silent, its crew frozen between fear and awe as they realized they had witnessed something that should never have existed. The captain raised his binoculars, his voice hoarse as he asked, "What do we do now?" And the Admiral lowered her head, knowing there was no easy answer. Only the truth. She activated her transmitter one last time, inputting a sequence she had memorized. Years ago, a self-destruct cascade coded to the original siren core. She had kept it locked away for this exact moment. Her fingers trembled as she entered the final key. The device blinked red once, then turned white. Signaling confirmation, she whispered to the captain through the comms to move his ship out of range, and when he asked how far, she simply said, "Far enough that you don't see the light." The destroyer engines roared back to life, the captain giving full thrust as sailors scrambled to stations. The ship cut through the waves faster than it ever had. The Admiral watched them go. A faint smile touching her lips. Not of peace, but of acceptance. She turned toward the glowing water, the hum below now deep and rhythmic like the heartbeat of a giant. She held the transmitter tight to her chest and whispered a name, the code name of the project that had once saved nations and nearly destroyed them, then pressed the final switch. The sea erupted in silence. A single pulse of light surged. Through the depths, bursting upward like a star underwater, the destroyer's crew turned in time to see the horizon bloom in ghostly white. The Admiral's yacht vanished in the flash. No sound, no wreckage, only ripples spreading outward like rings of memory. And as the light faded, the captain stared at the empty sea, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had seen. The comms crackled once more, and through the static came a single faint voice saying, "Control restored," before it went silent. Forever.